he told me to buy panniers. I didn't know what a panniard was. I had to look that up. But I said, okay, I'm going to buy some panniards.
The only way I was really able to do this trip emotionally was to approach it as a filmmaker.
I got the motorcycle. My first concern was that I was going through a midlife crisis. I would buy this motorcycle and sit in the garage. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to do something to make sure that that doesn't happen. So one of the people that I was following on YouTube had done this trip to all the national parks on his motorcycle, and I said, that's it. I will use the national parks as pearls on the Strand, and that will pull me forward, and I'll set myself a goal. And I did for all the Western national parks was my aspiration.
Around about 39 or so, and it's the last day of school, Pineview High School, and I say to my friend, I think I'm going to go to the Harley store, and I sent a text to my wife, and I said, I'm going to go look at some motorcycles, and she said, is this your midlife crisis? And I go, I don't know, maybe, but I walked around, looked at some motorcycles, and I got a text from my friend Eric. And I might have been actually there at the Harley store when I got the text that said, if we're going to remain friends, then you're going to have to tell me if you go to the Harley store.
And I was walking to school every day. My father had an old Suzuki scooter that he was just laying in the garage, and I got tired of walking, so I thought, well, I'll try the scooter thing. It was a time when scooters were not cool at all, so my personal branding really took a hit. But at the same time, for whatever reason, it was comfortable to me. I enjoyed it, and I started getting teased about this little scooter I was riding, so I kind of made up this future state where I was going to have a bigger motorcycle. So I was telling all my friends I'm going to get a bigger motorcycle, and I really did get interested in that. So I started getting all the motorcycle magazines, Cycle World and Dirt Bike and things like that, and narrowed in on I was going to get a Kawasaki 175.
I started out with a Honda 175, went to a Nighthawk 450, to a CB 750 Custom, which was a brilliant bike. And then I had some time off in between there while we were taking care of other life's curveballs, and then I picked up the Blackbird, the Honda CBR 1100 XX, and that was the bike, that was the machine that connected me to this whole concept of isolation, present, focus, mindfulness. Because on that motorcycle, you couldn't think about anything else. You had to pay strict attention to all the demands of the machine and the road and the conditions and everything that was going on.
Anyway, he said, I've got another bike you might be interested. Come and check this out. So I met him at the, what was that dealership? It was a Yamaha dealership, different motorsports. And then this bike happened to be there. And I looked at it and I thought it was awesome. And I think I went back to it with Eric and Mindy, and she said, why don't you get on it? Try it on, just get on the bike. And I thought, okay, yeah, I will. Ask the guy if that's all right. Sure, get on the bike. Like they're going to tell you don't get on the bike. I'm just putting my hands on the handlebars, getting a feel for it. And she says, you look really good on that bike. So I blame her always for this bike. But then I was out on a test ride for it. Oh, man, she felt good. She felt so good.
By the end of the school year, I'd been working as a busboy, riding my scooter, and bought my first motorcycle, a Kawasaki 175. And almost immediately after I broke it in, this was at the end of my senior year, I bought the bike, and in July I rode it from Phoenix to Colorado Springs and back. My first real long trip that I'd ever taken on a motorcycle. And for a long time, until just recently, the last long trip I had taken, a multi-night trip I'd ever taken on a motorcycle.
Mindy and I put a lot of miles on that, and bless her heart, she was the one who, rode pillion until she couldn't stand it anymore, so we got her own bike.
And when I was rolling back into town, I had this moment where I got caught in a monsoon storm, and I pulled into a bank teller overhang. It was a Sunday and nobody was there, and I just waited out this storm. I just felt so empowered, right? So I don't know, just it was a sensation that I think probably stuck with me to this day, about the freedom and the sense of power that motorcycles could give me.
And I thought maybe this is too much bike, a little too much bike for me. It's a 1700 class, 1670, I think, to be exact. And I rode it home after I bought it, thinking this might be too much bike. It might be too much bike. And then I took it on the highway on my way to Vegas. Found myself in one of those situations where I got to brake or I got to motor through. And I hit the throttle and realized, no, it's not too much bike. It's just the right amount of bike. And it's been nothing but happy memories ever since. I love this thing. I call it the BAMF cycle. BAMF cycle. It's a badass motherfucker. Cycle.
The Blackbird was a magical motorcycle, and I didn't think anything could go through and surpass the experience of riding that bike. Circumstances made it so I needed to get rid of that as well, which was probably a good thing, because I would either be dead or in jail, one of the two. And then a few years went by when I had to fill that motorcycle-shaped hole in my heart with another bike, and I found a used Kawasaki KLR 650, and for some people, that would have been enough bike to drive you away from motorcycle riding. For me, it was something that I could work on. Parts were inexpensive, relatively, and I could use it to do something I've always wanted to do, which was go off-road and get away from the tarmac, because I had never done anything like that in the past. And so that was a good bike to kind of break in my chops as far as off-road riding was concerned.
This all began when my wife said, what are you going to do when you retire? And I didn't know. I honestly had no thoughts about what I was going to do with retirement, and it was coming up. So I started looking around, and for whatever reason I lived on YouTube, and I started seeing motorcycle travel. And my kids were scattered around the western states, so I thought, great, I'll get something to travel. And my first thought was a touring bike. So I get something comfortable. I'd always sort of fantasized about a big windshield and a stereo blasting and all the sort of comforts that a touring bike would give me. And I went down to the BMW dealer and I sat on an LT and I went, oh my God, this was, having not been on a motorcycle in 28 years, it just felt immense. The guy at the BMW dealer pointed me to his GS and said, you should look at this. And he was right. He sort of could sense the right category for me. The GS, again, just seemed a little bit big for me. So as I started doing my research, I narrowed it down to probably 6 or 7 motorcycles, and I went down to the Triumph dealer and saw the Tiger, and just the appearance honestly lit me up. As soon as I got on the Tiger and I got maybe 6 blocks, I thought everything about this Tiger is better, more polished, more complete, more well made. The engine was amazing, and I just kind of fell in love with it, right? And I stopped looking. I thought, okay, this is it. I don't need to look any further.
And I traversed the state probably 20 different times on that KLR, commuting back and forth between Salt Lake and St. George, and taking the roads less traveled there as a result of that, which instilled in me even more of a desire to do that. And with that desire came obviously a need to have a better motorcycle to go through and do that with. At that point, we were living in North Salt Lake, and I went down to the local Triumph dealer and threw my leg over a used Triumph Tiger 800XC and took it for a test drive and bought it on the spot. It didn't take me more than a half an hour because the bike was just remarkably solid, intuitive. It felt like an extension of myself. I took it to Moab and did a lot of trails through there and moto camped with it, and it quickly became a favorite. So when I approached Addie about the idea of doing a Pacific Northwest tour, it was obvious then at that point, well, we would need another motorcycle. Addie would take the 800XC, and then I would find something like that. Originally I was looking for an 800 as well, but then I found a 1200XC, the Tiger Explorer 1200XC, in the same livery as the 800. So I found one down in Florida online. I called them up during a lunch break while I was teaching. I said, hey, I want to see more of this motorcycle. I finally asked if they would just get on the bike with the passenger, have the passenger shoot it with their phone while they were right, so I could listen to it. I could hear the gear changes and things that way. And once I was satisfied that the bike was, was good, I bought it, sight unseen, really, as physically unseen, and had it shipped to Utah for less money than what the 800 cost me. So I was like, well, it's meant to be, it's one of those things. So then, so at that point, then our stable held 2 Tigers, and Addie and I were able to go through and continue to prepare for that trip.
When I told Sue what I was planning to do, she was very nervous about me getting another motorcycle. I'd had a motorcycle when we first met, put it away when we raised our children, and then to get back to it, her feeling was at my age and my, and at our position going into retirement, she didn't want me doing something so risky. I think that's what it kind of boiled down to. So we had a number of conversations about it, and I was pleading my case, I think for the 3rd time, late into an evening, and I'd already, been told you can get a motorcycle license, but don't get a bike, and it was sort of these teaser kind of things were happening, which was very frustrating to me. So I was kind of ready to do something more material. So I was just telling her passionately how much it meant to me, and finally just gave up and went to bed. And I woke up the next morning, and there was a text from her that said, "You do what you need to do, I'll deal with it." So I thought, this woman is amazing, and she's kind of overcome her concerns. So she came home from work the next day and came storming into the house and said, "Did you buy that effing bike?" Because it was sitting in the driveway. I said, "Yeah, I have a text from you that says, you do what you need to do and I'll deal with it." She said, "This is me dealing with it." So I learned then that she communicated clearly, but I hadn't listened clearly to what she was saying.
Not everybody understands the whole motorcycle trip ride thing, and I get it. It's not for everybody. There's a very short poem that kind of explains it for me, and I can't remember the poem verbatim, but it gets into the idea that it absolutely focuses you in the present. The poem says something about how all of our fears really exist in the future, and motorcycle riding, the journey forces you to concentrate on the present, especially when you're at speed on a motorcycle. For me, it gives my OCD something to do while I'm riding along, So it has a way to pull me out of the present cares, the things that might be weighing me down, and puts me into a better state of mind. And so to do that with people that you love, to do that with people who share the same passion or who understand that same ability is pretty cool.
So Eric says to me, we're doing a documentary, we're filming, can we borrow your bike? That's the story I had in my head. I don't actually know if that's the truth. But at the very same time, I was taking Youth Symphony kids to San Francisco. what if I were to ride at some point? I'll ride the motorcycle at some point. And the thought of riding that across the Golden Gate Bridge, man, I thought that's a great idea. We had a lot of fun. We filmed up beyond the Golden Gate Bridge.
I don't want to be 80 years long going, I sure wish I had a bike.
Ed and I go back years, a decade more, 15, 16 years. And I invited him to go on the Pacific Coast Highway trip that we were doing, which was also being shot by one of my film students as a documentary. And so we had the luxury, really, of having a film crew following us along. We picked that up in San Francisco, which was our turnaround. We were going to come back down the coast at that point. And we had his motorcycle on a trailer that was with our camera gear. Just had a brilliant time with that. So I wanted to not necessarily recreate that moment, but to create more moments and share that passion with Ed. Brian, I met on a Triumph owner's website, and he was kind of paying attention to my YouTube channel when Addie and I were planning the Pacific Northwest tour.
When Eric and I first met, he had shared that he was going on a trip up to the Northwest, and I was going to go on the same trip, and I asked him to share, his itinerary and his experiences as he went, because I was going to learn from them. And he came out to California and said, why don't you go on a ride with us? And
he happened to live in proximity to where Addie was living at the time in Monterey, California. I came out to Monterey with my motorcycle, and we decided to do just kind of a day trip. And I asked Brian if he wanted to come along, and so that was our main introduction to him.
And from the very beginning, Eric and I felt very comfortable with Eric, and I felt like he was somebody that had the same sort of interests, the same sort of approach to life.
Like his wife Sue talks about, we were walk-on friends kind of a thing. It was just kind of this instant good juju, this instant relationship that way with somebody that we could both relate to back and forth.
Eric let me in. He opened his family, and he opened his sort of experiences and his heart to me, and it was easy. It was easy to kind of fall into a friendship with him, and I just feel like we've known each other for so much longer than we actually have.
One of the most common comments that I get when I'm riding, especially on longer trips, is usually by some kind of adventure admirers, and typically the comment is always, "Oh, someday," And maybe you, as a rider, you've made that same remark. Someday I'm going to go ride up to Alaska, or someday I'm going to hit the tail of the dragon, or whatever the case might be. I've been quoted as saying that someday is someday until one day, and that one day for me was February 5th, when I was diagnosed after extensive biopsies with mantle cell lymphoma. And if you went through and looked that up, you'd find that there's not a lot of good positive things about that. It's an aggressive and terminal cancer. There's no cure for it, and the course of action's pretty terrible as far as both its treatment and what it does to you. I've been diagnosed as a stage 4 that way as well. So I made a few phone calls to people where I didn't want them to find out by any other means about what was going on. And two of those folks that I called were Ed and Brian. So I made the phone call to Ed.
So Eric calls me, says, I got a bucket list. I want to go on a ride, and I want to go with you. And in that same conversation, he told me that he had been diagnosed with a cancer.
And then I chatted with Brian about it. I can't remember if it was a phone call. I'm sure it was. I can't imagine breaking this kind of stupid news to somebody over a text or something that way. So, and that's, for me at least, when all kinds of things went in motion, the bucket list kind of thing starts to come into play. And a big part of that bucket list was to do another motorcycle ride. I did one with my daughter Addie, the Pacific Northwest Tour, which was even more extraordinary post-diagnosis. It was during that ride that I had all the symptoms of my lymphoma. And not understanding what my body was responding to, that was just as wearing as this ride was, right? Here I'm responding to my chemotherapy in a way, and it was very similar. Very similarly exhausting.
I haven't ridden this bike in a while. I got to get this ready now-ish. Had it into a shop, got it ready to go, and then didn't ride it because I was waiting for the, Eric was going through a lot of chemo, and then we made some concrete plans. He's on this trip for 21 days, and I'm just on the finishing up my leg of it. I did a bit of study on road trips and how to be on a bike and manage curves and balancing and counterbalancing. I confess, up until 2 or 3 weeks ago, I couldn't do a U-turn for crap. I was terrible at U-turns, but I decided I'd better step up a little bit. I didn't know anything about camping either, so I rode my bike from St. George to Bountiful so that I could get equipped. And he told me to buy panniers. I didn't know what a pannier was. I had to look that up. But I said, okay, I'm going to buy some panniers. So he taught me how to stuff them. And then a few nights ago, pitched my first tent, put up my first tent in, 40 years. Oh, it's been a long time. But so it's been like a new adventure. So it's like from scratch. And so it could be the start of a lot of new adventures. I hope it is.
We attempted a trip to the north rim of the Grand Canyon and ran into some bad weather and circumstances and ended up having to abort that trip after just I think one night. My observation in that, and Eric and I kept talking about how we enjoyed traveling together and we enjoyed our time together, and it would be great to do more traveling together. I personally was frankly skeptical of his health's ability to sustain a longer trip. I started penciling out this very lengthy trip of 9 parks, the one that Eric and I are on right now. And I think one or two times I may have mentioned it to Eric, and he said, "Yeah, I'm in. I want to do that." And my own thoughts on that were, how? Right? I honestly didn't. After having the 2 other trips with him, and watched him, struggle with his health and his ability to sustain even those trips, I really was skeptical that this was going to work out. And in my own mind, I think I had sort of dismissed that was going to come true. It was going to be Eric's wish and hope, and I wanted to not douse that. But at the same time, I really wasn't thinking that was going to happen. And I think in November, Eric asked me, "What riding jacket do you use?" My riding jacket that we had last summer, kind of failed me. And what riding jacket do you ride? I said, "Well, the Climb Carlsbad." And why? He goes, "Well, I want to buy this for our next trip." And I said, "Well, to be clear, what trip are we talking about here?" And Eric said, "Well, the 9 National Park trip, the big one." And I was shocked that was still an aspiration of his. And I again did not wanted to douse that, and said, "Great, you're on the list. Let's just do it."
At the time that I talked with Brian, he was planning his national park trip, and I thought somewhere along the line that I had asked if I can come along with him. In talking to him, I guess that was more of an assumption on my part than it was actually getting permission to do so, but he was gracious enough to not only include me in the planning process, but also, elicit my input on the trip.
And I talked to Sue about that. I said, I don't know how that's going to work out, and I've got this sort of selfish aspiration to get to all these parks, and Eric wants to join me, and I certainly want that to happen. So we started, planning, and I kind of went into my own deep planning mode and cranked out this very lengthy itinerary and agenda, very detailed, very specific.
For me, it was pretty cool because somebody's doing all the hard work for me. And if you want somebody doing the detailed stuff for you, it's going to be Brian, because he's very meticulous in all his details and reservations and how many miles. And
as we got into this year, Eric started chiming in a little bit about that, and we started looking at the plans together, and I became more convinced that he was convinced that this was the thing that he was going to do. Privately, I don't think I shared this with Eric at the beginning of the trip, I was skeptical that he was going to get very far. I just didn't know how his health was going to be able to, having seen the other two trips and the impacts that they had, how his health was going to be able to allow that to happen.
I was feeling pretty good, actually. That was a pretty long ride from the Grand Canyon to Mesa Verde, and I thought, okay, this will be kind of the test for me whether or not I'm going to continue on.
As I watched Eric go to Grand Canyon and make it and take a tough trip across northern Arizona where it was hot and challenging day, and go and do some hiking in Mesa Verde, and then go and do the loop of the other parks that we had to do in Colorado, I sort of every step of the way I kept wondering, it was a day at a time thing for me, right? Is he going to wake up tomorrow and go, I've had enough, and I just have to kind of call it now? And I think when we got to Denver, I was really kind of seeing that, hey, he was going to be stubborn about this. Whether I don't know how healthy he really was internally, but he certainly wasn't going to let me know if he wasn't, and we were going to just crank out the rest of this trip together.
I loved Mesa Verde. Loved the ride. Loved the day. On a walk down to the Longhouse, I always tell people I hate hiking, but a few steps into it, I like it. Oh, and Eric he wore his Junior Ranger badge, and I wish I had, because he got some attention from other Rangers. It was the best.
It put me into a context of understanding that we are not as advanced as we think we are. They're using math, they're using critical thinking, they would have to have organized in terms of their labor, and who's going to be doing what, who's going to become an expert in stone laying or stone cutting or irrigation or whatever the case might be. The longer I spent there, the more I realized that we've muddied the waters considerably with technology. I don't know that we've become any better or any more advanced. We might be able to do a lot more things there, but walking through the Longhouse really taught me that we collectively we're not as special as we think we are.
It's a glorious ride through really bendy roads. Got to use my new bendy road skills.
So the air hits that first wall, goes through the...
David is a Renaissance man, surely, and is currently acting as a host ranger at Mesa Verde. So he was able to kind of give Brian the inside scoop to the park. I got a Junior Ranger badge that I was able to exploit during my my time in the park. But the highlight with David was when he brought out one of his flutes that he had made and played for us. So Ed rode with us as far as Mesa Verde, and he had what looked like an extraordinary time as well, and it really kind of lit a fire under him as far as getting connected back to the road on two wheels again there. And I'm looking forward to doing a lot more rides with him as well. So Ed dropped out of our trio, and he made his way solo back to St. George, where he lives. And following that, we went to the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and which is immensely surprising in terms of, Mesa Verde was in terms of what the Pueblo people could do. Black Canyon gives you this condensed version of the power of water and wind and what Mother Nature can throw at something and create these extraordinary canyons and rock faces. It was amazing. I had no idea. So after we visited the dunes, then we went up into Buena Vista, Colorado, and we went up the Cottonwood Canyon to the Collegiate Peaks campground, and that was probably my favorite campground. It was beautiful, it was quiet. It was logistically good for, the bikes were nearby the tents, that kind of thing. But it was just a kind of a great place to just relax and regroup and get things together. My best sleep wasn't in any of the hotels that we were at. It was with my tent and my sleep system, in the camping. And that's when all the pain settles in from the day, the back aches or whatever. But while I'm on the Tiger and while we're rolling, my hands will fall asleep, or you make accommodations, but the pain's no longer in the front of my brain.
Somewhere in Colorado, the trip shifted for me, and it shifted in a really material way. And I shared this with my wife.
But I was loading on proteins and just trying to keep my energy going, and that was a trick for me, I think, really to keep this whole thing perpetuated.
So I started penciling out this very lengthy trip of 9 parks. I think one or two times I may have mentioned it to Eric, and he said, "Yeah, I'm in. I want to do that." And my own thoughts on that were, how?
I don't think he had a whole lot of confidence in me that I was going to be able to finish this trip, and he never expressed that to me. He never articulated that.
After having the 2 other trips with him and watched him, struggle with his health and his ability to sustain even those trips, I I really was skeptical that this was going to work out. I started out with this. This is the grand culmination of these trips that I have done and these plans that I've made, and it's my trip. And Eric's joining me on my trip. Somewhere along in Colorado, it became Eric's trip. That was a huge shift for me, and a really cool shift for me. I was able to really stop treating this as something that was all mine, and this goal was something that was now a shared goal, and this whole aspiration that Eric had to do more, and my sort of commitment to him now a year or two old to help him do that. This is all part of the plan, right? This is all part of what was coming together, and Eric's joy and Eric's remarks about what we're seeing and what we're doing were wins for me, right? It wasn't just ticking off parks. It was seeing him wake up the next day and say, let's keep going. That was a really major shift for me. So the last half of this trip has been all about supporting Eric on his journey. And that's created a new journey for me, which has been really cool, very rewarding for me, and very meaningful for me.
He was always like, "Oh, you ready to go again?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it, man. Let's go." So I appreciate that about him. He never negated any direction I had or any gumption I had to get back on the bike and go. Rocky Mountain National Park was also extraordinary, and I think maybe we saw about a fifth of it, because we went up we had a pass that we had to get for about every park that we went through that put us into a specific place. What was really nice was because we were on our bikes and parking was limited at Bear Lake, there was no traffic. There was just us and the shuttle buses, basically, because there's plenty of motorcycle parking there. So the signs would say, well, there's no parking, get on the shuttle. So people were riding the shuttle while we had the ability to ride our bikes up. So from Rocky Mountain, then we made our way into up to the Grand Teton National Park. And we went over the Teton Bridger Pass that drops you down on the east side of the main valley that the Tetons are in. And I don't know what it is about that mountain range, more than anything else I've ever seen, that takes my breath away and makes me emotional in a way to go through and see that.
I just felt like every park we went to and every campsite we woke up on just felt better than the next one, because I think it just meant that it wasn't over yet, and there was still more to come.
So we came in the south part of the park, and the plan was to go around Yellowstone Lake, and then from there go north and hook up onto the Beartooth Highway and take that into Red Lodge, Montana. And we were there on the Sunday that they had the flash flooding. So we stopped at the Yellowstone Lodge there and got a cup of coffee and just kind of warmed up a bit. And at that point, we looked at the radar and realized that the Beartooth Highway was getting smashed as well, and that that would be not fun for us because it was snowing up there at that point. So we decided to exit the park through the northeastern side. So we would go around the lake and then we come up and over the part of the park that got burned. And then we hit this kind of ledge road that takes us then out of the park, out of the canyon. All the time looking at the river to the side of us. This was becoming more of a race against Mother Nature than it was just a national park tour. So from there we made our way to Red Lodge, Montana, and we stayed at the Bear something, I can't remember the name of it, but the lodge is on the main road there, and on the other side of the road is the river. And at the time you could smell it, and it was obviously higher than it had ever been because it was taking out all kinds of things on both sides of the shore. So I told Brian, I said, I'll bet you we're going to be evacuated come morning time. And sure enough, 7 o'clock in the morning, Brian's pounding on my door. They're evacuating us. Let's get out of here. Let's pack it up. And the river had risen at least 3 feet from the night before to that morning. It had taken out half the road that was there, and we needed to get out of there because the power lines were twanging back and forth, and we would have been stuck there if we didn't, pack it up and get on our way.
We've hit a wall, and a lot of things happened, I think, all at once to change and adjust this trip.
And that was also at the time when I made the determination that I was probably done. We still had another third of the trip to do. Brian still had, some parks to visit, and I did too. I wanted to see Devil's Tower. I wanted to go to the Badlands. I obviously wanted to see Mount Rushmore, those kinds of things. But I had hit a wall, and I just felt that all I could possibly do that was productive was sleep. Everything was just gone. And it's hard to explain what that feels like. There's just no desire to do anything. It's not just a matter of energy, it's a matter of willpower. And the only willpower I had left went right to here, as far as the throttle was concerned, to keep me going. So we left Red Lodge. We went the highway around, and then not as in road highway, but the higher ground way around. We must have crossed the Clark, I think, a half a dozen times coming through, and every bridge looked like it was just on the verge of being compromised by the river, by what was going on. So we made it to Cody, stayed there one more night, and the next morning we beelined it all the way back here to Bountiful. And there's a pattern there, obviously, I'm recognizing, because the same thing happened with Addie and I on the Pacific Northwest Tour. The same thing happened previously with me and Brian. We tried to do a trip to the Grand Canyon, and my health prevented that from coming to fruition. I blame the weather, but it was really me.
I think Eric's asked whether this was his intrusion into the plan, and because of his health now we're going to have to change course, and we talked a lot about, should I go alone and keep going, and should he come back alone, and I couldn't do that. I couldn't keep on my trip knowing that Eric is going to struggle to get back home and deal with this. It wasn't my trip anymore. So at the same time, the weather conspired to make it easier to make that decision and not feel guilty for either one of us to say, yeah, I think for both of us the right thing to do is to turn the trip around. So I know Eric feels like this is something that maybe helped cause me to fall short of my goals, but my goals changed so materially in this whole thing, and we got to a point when the trip where the weather was hard on me. And I know it was really, really hard on Eric. And I think he finally got to the point where his body was not going to allow him to keep driving forward. And as I looked at the rest of the trip together, notwithstanding my wanting to make sure he gets home safely, I wasn't really enthusiastic about going into more floods and more, snow and wind and potential heat. And it was time. It was time. And all the signs kind of lit up brightly for us.
I am so grateful to Brian and for all the work that he put into this. Mark helped out too as far as planning and getting things, and I was heartbroken that he wasn't able to join us. And then to have Ed come along and him knowing that this wasn't going to be an easy thing to do, not from a standpoint of riding a motorcycle, but from a standpoint of just being together. This whole thing casts a different light on the experiences that we have. And for me, it's like, is this the last time I'll see the Grand Tetons? Will I ever get back to Mesa Verde? And I can't think that way, because again, that projects me into the future. And that negates what the hell it was I was trying to do on the motorcycle, to begin with.